Hello, welcome to today's episode of The Academy. Today we're going to finish up Sun Tzu's Art of War, Chapter 8. We're going to go just the last three sentences, 12, 13, and 14. All these three are just one concept, but I think it's a pretty good summary to consider. Okay, this is more about the character of the actual general or in play right now. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, there are 5 dangerous faults which may affect a general. Recklessness, which leads to destruction. Cowardice, which leads to capture. A hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults. A delicacy of honor, which is sensitive to shame. Over-solicitude for his men, which exposes him to worry and trouble. And these are the 5 besetting sins of a general, ruinous to the conduct of war. Now, when an army is overthrown and its leaders slain, the cause will surely be found among these 5 dangerous faults. Let them be a subject of meditation. Okay, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But these are 5 interesting concepts. Now they're kind of a real nice checklist of how we, as players, actually engage in the game that we enjoy. So let's just start with we'll just go through these 5, and let's take each one independently. The first one is recklessness. Now, the concept here is the idea of attacking without deliberate calculation. Basically results in error. You're going to make mistakes because you really haven't thought things through, and that can actually be exploited by an enemy who's ready or an opponent who's ready for that. So, think back a few chapters where calculation was one of the factors, one of the military disciplines. He's reinforcing here how important it is. So there's a couple commentators have added some nice color to this and kind of helped us understand the context at the time. The idea of recklessness is bravery without forethought. Again, the idea of not thinking things through before you make your action. Cheng Yu actually said an opponent, a reckless opponent, must not be encountered with brute force, but may be lured into an ambush and slain. The idea being here, again, if you're not really thinking through what it is you're doing and you're essentially just sending your miniature troops in, almost wave after wave, just beating on your opponent, you really aren't looking at the entire picture, and you're probably missing a lot, and you're making a lot of calculation errors that your opponent can actually exploit. And this whole idea about risk-taking is extremely critical in combat, in war, and that's part of where this fits in. Matter of fact, several of these 5 sins actually revolve around that risk concept and how you deal with the risk. In this case, it's the idea of nothing ventured, nothing gained. Great risk, great reward. So just go for it. The problem with that is it doesn't require the thought, the scheming, the planning, which allows you to do all those other things Sun Tzu talked about. The deception, the baiting, the ambushing, all the things, the maneuver that are important to getting an advantage on your opponent. Just charging in with full force is reckless and can lead to errors. Okay, so that's what he's trying to guard against. Now, cowardice, which leads to capture, that was an interesting thing there. Now, what we term as cowardice, that's the word that's been translated into cowardice. It's not quite what Sun Tzu means here. The actual translation probably would have been better if used a phrase. Cao Kun basically puts it, whom timidity prevents from advancing to seize the advantage. So essentially, the general who kind of plays it safe, who doesn't act quickly when there's an opportunity comes up, right? So what's interesting is that Meng Shi gives kind of a slightly different paraphrase and gets us more in the thought process of the general. It's thinking, he who is bent on returning alive. So again, it's still part of that risk aversion. You're not willing to take the risks when it's there because you're just afraid of losing too much. You're afraid of dying in this case, but you don't want to make a mistake, you don't want to fail, you don't want to lose a part of your army, whatever it might be. As a result, you don't take the risks, You don't press an advantage and it slips away. You know, a good illustration of this concept out of history actually can be found in the Pacific Theater, mostly in naval battles. Now, the Japanese Navy was a skilled Navy, good equipment. They weren't hurting for quality at all. American Navy was a solid Navy as well. So you had two forces that were roughly equal in skill. Now, we won't get into individual ship capabilities, whatever, but just in general, you're not going to find a clear advantage when the small ship, we're talking mostly cruiser and destroyer actions, which was the bulk of the battles that were fought in the Pacific. What you'd find is that the two forces would go toe-to-toe. The command would be very good on either side. Tactics well executed. Of course, one side will make a mistake or the other will make a mistake. But whenever the Japanese managed to bloody the American fleet was well enough to cause it a lot of damage and potentially get themselves an advantage, a significant advantage, potentially one that they can exploit and basically advance their campaign, something always happened. It was strange. The Japanese commanders simply turned back. They didn't press the advantage. They played it very cautiously. Don't quite know why. I personally don't, on all the reading I've done, I haven't found a nice, concise explanation for what traits what it was about the way the Japanese Navy command thought that kept allowing these advantages to slip away. There are several times where the American fleet would have been so devastated that the surviving Japanese ships could have basically taken the rest of the ships out, or crippled them enough, actually break through to whatever objective is nearby and threaten something more important. So that's what we're looking at here. Situations where the general is not willing to take that advantage, seize the initiative, seize the advantage when it comes, seize the opportunity, kind of plays it safe. Okay. Now, so that's what we're talking about here. When he's thinking in the terms of cowardice leads to capture. So if you're not taking advantage of the situation, the advantage of the opportunities, you're more likely to lose. Okay. Now, the hasty temper part, a hasty temper which can be provoked by insults. This is kind of interesting. This one you can actually game a little bit. There's a couple different aspects to this that I want to go over. The first one is something that you actually can use in a tournament. Probably shouldn't use it in a friendly game. I've mentioned stuff like this before. But it's where the opponent gets a little emotional during the game about maybe it can respond to comments that dissing his army. Just there's a lot of banter that can go back and forth that the opponent may not take well, that can throw his mind a little bit off. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. You don't want to insult people straight out, but if you can allude to some of those things, you could damage your opponent mentally that way, to the point where they lose focus and they make mistakes, what have you. In the historical context, it's looking at the generals who just they can only take so much, and then they crack, and then they become reckless. Okay. Now, there is a way though that you can exploit this. It's not just the hasty temper where you can insult your opponent or make cracks that would kind of unsettle them, but this is also a situation where the opponent if the battle goes poorly, he doesn't take it well, or if you are acting kind of cocky or self-assured when things aren't going as well for him, he kind of again loses focus, kind of breaks down and becomes less efficient. So you can kind of work that angle. Again, it's leaving it to your own discretion how mean you want to be, but when you're dealing with a tournament, there's been some tournament players that I have heard of, and some actual players I've actually experienced outside of tournaments that get a little bit under your skin sometimes. And I don't know if it's on purpose or by just their personality, but it is something that you can exploit during a game. What I would advise personally is to essentially avoid doing this to your opponent. But know this, that if you understand your opponent well enough to realize that they can become upset when things go poorly for them, then you might want to, on the table, make something bad happen to them. So, for example, they might have a unit that they think is really important. May not be the key to their battle plan or anything like that, but it's something that they think is extremely important. It's valuable to them. Maybe it's their favorite unit, whatever. And you deal it a devastating blow. That will throw him off a bit, and that will hopefully cascade as he sees that failure, that setback, and he doesn't handle it well. You can just kind of keep, pouring that on. That's as far as I would take it. I wouldn't go any further than that, just because you don't want to be mean again. Now, the next piece is a delicacy of honor, which is sensitive to shame. Now, this is not the idea of that a general shouldn't have honor. This is the kind of person who takes what other people say too personally. Someone makes it, I don't want to say insults them, but maybe besmirches their reputation. I'll use an example like this. Maybe it's a gamer who does not appreciate someone thinking of them as a cheese player, or that guy who's whatever. Maybe he has a bad, doesn't respond well to someone thinking he is something he's not. Thinks he has a bad reputation. What's going to happen there is the general or the player will kind of act out and become upset as a result. Okay, now this is one you should never do. Let's be polite. We're in a game. Yes, we want to compete against each other. We want to have fun, but you definitely don't want to do anything that could essentially be attacking the opponent's personality, his sense of who he is, his reputation. Don't do that. Do not do that, okay? In war, it makes sense. In real life, in gaming, it does not. Do not do this. So this is one situation where there is a corollary on the table, but you do not want to act upon it. In fact, if you want to be a good player, avoid it. Always treat your opponent with respect. Okay, sorry. So off my soapbox. Anyway, okay. The fifth one is over-solicitude for his men. Basically, this is about the general being too worried about the condition of his men. Worried about losses. Now, when I first started, way back a long time ago, when I started wargaming, and we got into the games where there were squad level type units, 5, 10 men per counter, things became a little bit more real as I got into college. And you start realizing those 10 men are casualties, and you can start picturing, what's happened to them. Over time, as I began playing, started actually getting into miniatures where you actually have a model representing the person. You can start seeing, this person's getting wounded, this person getting killed. And you have a feeling of, a general shouldn't throw away his resources as men. You start thinking about minimizing casualties at all costs. That's really what Sun Tzu's talking about here. The general who's too worried about ordering his men to go forward and die. Obviously, no general wants that, but it's a reality of war, and some have to sacrifice to make, for the greater good, so to speak, for the rest of the army to be successful, to obtain the objectives, to secure the goals of the nation. Some might have to die. If the general worries too much about that, he's, again, not going to take the risks he needs. He won't take the bold action he would want. And instead, his opponent will take advantage of him. Okay, so we don't have to worry about actually sending our toy soldiers to die, but sometimes we do worry about the body count. And we need to be aware that that is not something in a straight game we shouldn't have to worry about. We should not consider whether or not half our force remains, or a third of our force remains, or any of it remains. As long as we win the game, that's what counts. Now, the only qualifier here is when you're playing in a campaign where the GM has set up a kind of a rule set or a scenario string that where the casualties you take in one battle can basically cause attrition and weaken you later. So then you do have to be a little bit more careful. But still, there, you don't want to let that dictate what you're doing. Here it's basically over solicitude. You want to be concerned about the body count, but you don't want it to control your actions, control your motives. So that's what we're dealing with here in this particular sentence. Okay. So if you go through those 5 things, you think through those are the faults a general can have that will basically undermine his ability. It's, as Sun Tzu says, meditate on those, think about them. When you are in the game, are you exhibiting any of these? Work to avoid that. Okay. So I hope you learned something. I'll catch you next week in the next edition of the Academy. Enjoy. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.